and welcome to another episode of Some Random Thoughts. I am your host, Ryan Mulkowsky. On this episode, I have with me my special guest, Brady Hardin. Brady is the host of the Life After podcast, which focuses on deconstructing beliefs, discovering who you are, and reimagining the future after Christian fundamentalism. His focus is on secular humanism after being in the Christian ministry. Together, we discussed Brady's background as a former Christian minister who deconverted out of Christianity and into secular humanism. We also talk about their journey of living fully into their queer identity and co parenting. We talk about issues with progressive Christianity, especially Brady's experiences with progressive Christian clergy who seek to minimize or dismiss completely queer perspectives of non Christians. We talk about the power of storytelling and how this tool can be used to help those who are deconstructing and also form meaningful secular communities. Thank you for listening and enjoy.
I
Brady,
think so.
welcome to Some Random Thoughts. How are
Hey
you?
Ryan, it is a pleasure to be here. Thank you. I really liked your music that was just playing. It was beautiful.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm always trying to find like just the right sound between like my moodiness, but then my foolhardy optimism, which is, that's a
Okay,
very specific sound.
I went on one show and they made music for me. Like I guess he was like a worship leader in a previous life, and so they like incorporated music. It was Dirty Rotten School or Church Kids.
Church Kids, Dirty Rotten Church Kids.
Yeah,
Yeah, great.
and they had like this whole intro. It was really amazing. I was like, oh,
That's
thank you.
dope. I am not
Yeah.
nearly as talented. So I love Dirty
The
Rotten
Brady
Church Kids.
Bunch
Shout out to
theme.
Dirty Rotten Church Kids.
Yes,
That's
yes.
great. Well, Brady, like I said, I am so thrilled that you're here. Just to give my listeners a background as to why I invited you. I've been following Brady for a good 3 years or so, and Brady's doing amazing work, which I will let him explain later on. But in my deconstruction process, I kept on coming across a lot of people on Twitter and other social media outlets that as I was talking about my deconstruction publicly, I was having a lot of people, especially progressive Christians, that were telling me, oh, you can deconstruct, but you can't deconstruct this much. Or you can ask
Yes.
this question, but you can't ask that question. Or it was like they were like gatekeeping and limiting my own like movement through my deconstruction, my own genuine journey. And then Brady is just like a breath of fresh air. I just like find him on
Thank
Twitter and I
you.
immediately connect. And Brady's like, no, fuck that. Like, ask all the questions, do your research, like, do the critical thinking, like, do the things that you need to do to find meaning and purpose for yourself. And don't let anybody shoehorn you or gatekeep you or put you in a box. And I was like, thank you. There was somebody out there that is saying these things and is like holding these people accountable, because it seems like a lot of Christians are not held accountable in all areas of spectrum, but it seems like progressive Christianity has an issue with accountability because they present themselves as like the intellectuals or the enlightened version of Christianity or the more inclusive form of Christianity. Accountability seems to be kind of like off the table from them, or you can't question them because, well, they're not like those conservative evangelicals. So, but I appreciate you being here, Brady. So tell the audience more about yourself, the work that you do, what you're doing now, why you do what you do.
Well,
And
damn, you
yeah.
described so much and like the essence of what I want to do. And that, okay, number one, thank you for that
Yeah.
description. And number two, like that gives me a hope that like, okay, I guess I am getting my message across. So thank you. That
You
means a
are.
lot.
You are. Yep.
So I grew up in a Southern Baptist home. My dad was a deacon. My mom was a Sunday school teacher. My dad was abusive at home and he cheated. And they had a big divorce when I was about 7 or 8. And it was a very unstable home life. My brother, he's 4 years older than me and a lot bigger. And he beat me a lot and would call me I'm gay, so when I say the F word, you know what F word I'm talking about. He called me that every day, would punch me, put me in a sleeping bag, hung from the ceiling, and hit me with a ball bat. And would always do this like when the parents were arguing or when they were often just whatever. And so I was kind of like on my own, and it was difficult. So then my parents split, 2 different homes, and two vastly different environments. And trying to operate that was difficult. Around the time I was 14, realized that I was gay and that I was attracted to other guys. That was going to be an issue, but I was never going to act on it because the only stability that I found was at church. So church became like my home, and that's where I went to find stability or family or my belonging. They ended up finding, I committed myself to the full-time ministry at 14, around the same time that I realized I was attracted to guys. The church ended up giving me a job, made a job for me, an internship at 16. And then when I was 19, I was poached by a church to become a youth pastor for them. I went to Bible college. Around when I was 18 or 19, I did mini deconstruction, where I left the church that I was brought up in and didn't read any book but the Bible for 2 years. And I came out a lot more literal. I came out a Calvinist on the other end. But like people would say, a very loving Calvinist, or quote, to the only Calvinist that I can handle. So thank you, past life people. I appreciate that compliment. And I became friends with Chuck, who was my co-host previously on Life After. And so over these years, I went to Bible college, I did all of this, and I went to a church that agreed with the beliefs that I had. And I found a woman that I was attracted to. Before our first date, she knew that I was attracted to men. And we worked things out, we talked it out, we courted, we got married, we had a kid, and then I found out that she had an Ashley Madison account, that she was cheating on me. And I tried to take her back 4 times. She had some mental health issues at the time. It was just horrible. My best friend in the church had just died suddenly of heart failure in the middle of all this as well.
Wow.
And so at that time was really hard. And so she finally filed for divorce. And then the church said that I needed to beg her to stay and ask for forgiveness of anything I ever could have done to want to make her have an affair. By then I was finally going to therapy, a Christian therapist, and he taught me about what spiritual abuse was. And when they said that I needed to do that, I said no, because I have done what I should have done. And I even followed the Bible, like I did and they disfellowshipped me 2 days later, went before the church and told them that I was kicked out. So I'd lost all of the support systems that I had, they were even controlling of like how much time I was seeing my infant son at the time. It was ugly. But I found a third-party representative, another pastor that both I trusted in the church. They agreed on him. And we met for months every Tuesday, going through emails and going through what happened, reliving all of the trauma of the divorce and the separations and all of this, relived all of that for me to prove my case that I was innocent. And the third-party pastor said, Brady's right. What the hell? Had to rebuke them and said that they owed me an apology, and they agreed. But at this time, my faith is starting to unravel, right? Because I'm like, believe my entire life was on this idea that if you had the Holy Spirit and if you believed in God and if you read your Bible and prayed, it would change you from the inside out. And that information, that the Holy Spirit would not let a willing one of his children trying to do the right thing to harm another child to do the right thing. He would enter something, and when that wasn't happening, my faith was unraveling. So when they agreed that they owed me an apology, I'm like, okay, maybe. But then a month went by, and 2 months went by, and 3 and 4. They just didn't have time. They couldn't get around to doing that publicly. And that's when I said, fuck this bullshit. And I downloaded Grindr and I started to hook up with men and suck dicks. Finally, at the age of like 26, 27, finally, I saved myself till marriage. And then and then I'm like, no, fuck this shit. So I'm finally like coming out, and then my beliefs are just, and I wait a little bit. I'm going to therapy. I wait a little bit, then I start making a podcast with Chuck. And the whole point of it wasn't for us to say, hey, this is what you all need to believe now. It was about, here are the skills that we can learn from listening to each other's stories. So if you listen to the podcast, even early on, it wasn't mostly just Chuck and I talking about what we believe now. It was about us, let us hear what you experienced. And what conversations are missing from our upbringing in fundamentalism. Like, we
Yep.
didn't listen to women then. Let's interview fucking more women. We didn't listen to people of color back then. Let's do that now. And like progressively throughout the show, I've been wanting to do more and more voices like that. And consequently, this like season, everybody is fucking queer, and I love it. But like, it's been a ride. And then here's the crazy part, and then I'll take a breath. My ex-wife, a couple of years ago, like, we started to develop a friendship for the sake of her son. We share 50-50 custody. She lives across town. And she told me that she's in a relationship with somebody. And I'm like, oh, cool, that's awesome. She's like, I don't think you understand. Her name is Sarah. Whoa, what? And she came out to me, and she's gone through therapy, and she's deconstructed, and she's worked out so much shit. We were able to work out our stuff, and then now we're like friends, like
That's
chosen
so great.
family. Like we do family holidays together, and she's had to cut off members of her family. I've had to cut off members of mine. Her partner Sarah's family has been so accepting and loving to me, and it's just so cool to now, like, it ties up the story in a neat bow, because as divorced people after God, we're secular. We were able to provide a loving home and thing that was never possible for my parents, who supposedly had the Holy Spirit living within them, unifying them as one because they're brothers and sisters in Christ. And having just that real life, like, oh my God, this story, let me zoom out and see what I can learn from myself, is that is possible without religion. And in our situation, and I would assume a lot of others, is even more possible without.
Wow, that is incredibly powerful. Thank you for sharing your story, Brady, because it's so important that we share our stories, we own our stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and realize that our stories really do matter. And that's what we're going to be talking about partly on this episode, is storytelling, the power of storytelling, and the power that our stories have to really not only transform ourselves, but transform the people around us. Because when people don't feel alone in their story, and they can link up with somebody that has similar experiences, and you can foster empathy and curiosity and collaborative vision for each other, and for what community can look like, and friendship can look like, and relationships, and all that good stuff. There's so much power in that. So we're definitely going to talk about that. One of the first things I want to talk about is obviously atheism. I'm like a baby atheist. I've been out as an atheist for over a year, probably closer to a year and a half now. After years of just struggling with my identity when it came to religious and spirituality. But I want to talk to you more about atheism, but specifically secular humanism, because I think a lot of times while the atheist label defines something, it doesn't define all of something for somebody, right? Because atheism is just like what I don't believe in, which
it's the answer to one question.
It's the answer, exactly. It's the answer to, like, it's like one side of the coin. The other side is, okay, so like, what do you believe in? And that's where I feel like humanism, secular humanism, really comes into play, because it provides that framework. So tell me more about your relationship with your beliefs, specifically when it comes to like atheism and secular humanisam, and kind of where you fall in that.
I'm like glowing. I'm like, you're gonna talk about this.
We are.
I first learned about secular humanism because of I met up with a guy on a dating app, and we watched a movie. It was like a Netflix and chill situation. And I'm like, so what do you do? And he's like, oh, I work for an ethical society. I'm like, what's that? And then he tells me, like, what it's like, and I'm like, this is what I've been looking for. And it also kind of like created a control for me to compare my experience with Christianity to, because especially as a Calvinist, everything was about the Christian brand. It was all about Jesus. And Jesus's teachings are all about Jesus. I feel like some progressives want to act like that's not in there, but no, he was very exclusivary. And when the Bible talks about what does it mean to be an antichrist, in First John, it doesn't talk about, oh, you're an asshole and you're being selfish to people. It just means that you don't accept the concept of lordship over you, that you're not willing to take on the term of a slave to Jesus as your Lord. So it's like, shit, this is really fucking problematic. So my coming out of Christianity, I had like a mini deconstruction where I came from a super evangelical toxic environment, and when I wanted to be more literal about the Bible, while they claimed to be extremely literal about the Bible but weren't, then I knew I knew some tips and tricks. I have narcissistic gaslighting parents. I have some like tools in my toolbox of how to deal with like these sort of conversations. And so then when I started to bump up against some progressive Christian influencers online, I felt like they were complete assholes, or they were making fun of fundamentalism for taking the Bible literally, while they also took the Bible literally. And when I pointed that out, then they gave me a talking to about loving gays better. And I'm like, whoa, motherfucker, I'm out. I am gay. And when you talk shit about people for taking the Bible literally, you're also including the internalized homophobia that I grew up with. You're also like mocking people for taking the Bible literally for obedience and suppressing their homosexuality. And you want to say that they misunderstood God's word and everything, then, well, God should have been a better motherfucking communicator. The Holy Spirit should have stepped in, or you all need to go back and change your own goddamn Bible, like take ownership of it. You don't get to share a holy book with fundamentalists unchanged, sharing the privileges with them, let them fight all of your fights, and then you just sit there and act like you're innocent.
Correct.
No, you know that, and there was never an element of that. And so secular humanism was important to me because I was also learning about the hero's journey, and not in a Jordan Peterson, whatever.
Jordan Peterson has the
James
weird
Cameron,
messed up.
James
Cameron's great. James Campbell.
This, Ryan.
James Campbell is the one.
Joseph Campbell.
Sorry.
Campbell.
You know what? We're messing so much shit up right now.
Made Titanic. Okay.
Which is great. And then Joseph Campbell's the genius that came up with like the mythology. Jordan Peterson's the messed up one that most people hate. The messed up one. And that's the one that you don't like. Yep. Got it. We're straightening out, guys. Let's move on.
Perfect. So Joseph Campbell ideology, people give him criticism too, and I understand it because he's looking objectively at the narratives that humanity used, and because humanity has been misogynistic, those are there. But when Peterson tries to use it as an excuse to be misogynistic, and fuck that shit. Am I allowed to curse in here?
Right.
Do you have to
yes, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
We've already cussed so much. There's no reason to turn back now. Let's just keep on going.
But what like the hero's journey with the monomyth and Joseph Campbell's philosophy taught me to do is to look objectively and to see what values were being taught in each culture and what ideas were being taught, what are the common threads. And it was the same thing to me of that Charles Darwin did to biology, of instead of just assuming that we are the ultimate perfect being given by God, or just because we're the perfect belief system given by God. No, let's zoom out and let's compare it to others. Let's see how it's evolved. Let's see how it's changed. Let's see where it comes from, what the influences in that environment were, and like that sort of history. And so the hero's journey allowed me to do that at the same time of looking at it objectively through a critical approach. It also gave me the tools and the methods needed to gain insight, real life wisdom, inspiration, not indoctrination, big difference, and values from whatever the fuck I want. Netflix. If I needed some weird ass spirituality, the OA. If I needed to learn about like how to empathize with like poor fucking white people in South Chicago, I'm watching Shameless. If I want to understand like the Black experience better, the Black queer experience, especially, I'm going to watch Pose, or I'm going to watch Blackish. Or in that sort of that helped me understand representation, because representation is somebody giving their experience, whereas in the Bible and in marketing, it's advertisement. You see this person who's like you, well, they went to Jesus, you can do the same thing. That's not representation. So I started to see like a difference between advertisements and representation. Started seeing the difference between indoctrination and inspiration, and realized that each one of these things that were very important to me, I can now have in a secular context. Community versus church, where it's like you all believe the same thing, so you have to like each other whether you want to or not. Whereas community, I'm like, no, let me hook up with a whole bunch of Star Trek people online because we have something in common. And it's not just our beliefs, but it's our interests and our values, and not what has been placed into us to be in common with each other, but like what interests we already innately had and then found each other because of. And each one of those like things changed for me. And my deconstruction just became more and more secular. Whereas I feel for a lot of deconstruction spaces and everything, progressive Christianity wants to say, no, deconstruction is just the movement from fundamentalism to progression. And I say, no, I think we should deconstruct that concept and zoom out farther.
Thank you.
Because we live in a global world. We live in a global world. Progressive Christianity is not for everyone. It's for those who are Christian, who believe that way. It's not going to be helpful to Buddhists. It's not going to be helpful to Hindus. It's not going to teach me how to share space or be a neighbor to somebody who's secular, or to share space with somebody who is Buddhist or ex-Christian or Hindu or Jewish or anything. It's just going to create a community centered on this one brand of belief or storytelling, when there's an entire smorgasbord of cultures that we can learn from, not appropriate from. Give them the credit, keep them the credit, but we learn from it. And that's fundamentally different in my head now.
Absolutely. Yeah, it reminds me of instead of as humans, we need to approach other humans instead of with condemnation and that kind of attitude of I don't know, condemnation and just judgmentalism and all that. We need to be collaborative and curious. Is those two words always spring up in my mind anytime when I'm trying to interact with another human being, especially with maybe a human that I disagree with, or we have some differences, is let me be collaborative and curious before I'm, condemnatory and, just wanting to hit the cancel culture button right on them. And look, I mean, all those things serve a particular purpose. I think somebody who just wants to troll and is just completely unwilling to engage with somebody in an honest way, go ahead and cancel them, block them, do whatever you need to do for your mental health and all that. But I think I'm grateful, at least for me, I'm grateful when I was deconstructing, that whenever I made a misstep or whenever I said something that was completely ignorant or foolish, or whenever you know what I mean, that people weren't trying to cancel me right away. People were like, well, why don't you look at it this way? Or that doesn't seem right. Or that doesn't seem logical. That doesn't seem plausible. And I'm grateful for those kind of people that were willing to kind of work with me through those things. And I'm not saying that everyone has to do that or everyone has to have that posture, but I'm grateful for those people that do. And you seem like one of those people that you don't have a problem calling, shit out, and you don't have a problem with, calling someone on the carpet. But at the same time, if somebody's honest with you and they're trying to have a conversation, you're willing to have a conversation too. Like, you're willing to show them different perspectives and different things. So let's talk a little bit more about the storytelling aspect, because we were referencing Joseph Campbell earlier with The Power of Myth, was one of the first documentaries that I saw by Joseph Campbell. And then I read some excerpts of his works and then investigated other things. But The Power of Myth, what that reminded me was the storytelling thing. Basically, you could, just replace myth with story. The power of story. What is the power of narrative? And yes, let's talk about that some more. So why are you so compelled that narrative or storytelling, that particular vehicle, is one of the most effective vehicles for human flourishing?
It started when I was a Christian, and I got too curious and too collaborative. and it opened up some doors.
go.
I was a
Yep.
huge, I grew up on television because my family was so as it is, right? And
Mhm.
I loved the show Community. It
Oh, me
felt
too.
different to
Yep.
me. It felt different than anything because when I watched, I was still a Christian. The way they handled Shirley's character, I
Mm,
thought she was cartoony at first, but then they made her learn and she
mm,
grew. And I'm like, wait, what the fuck is going on here? People do that? Because I grew up in a place where people don't grow up. And I
yep.
lived in the Big Bang Theory universe of Christian assholes, where
Mm,
if they had fucked up mommy problems in episode 1, they're still going to have fucked up mommy problems in the last episode. People don't
right.
change. But
Yep.
Community, and then I started to listen to special features and interviews with Dan Harmon, who's problematic at times as fuck, but
Yes. Right.
also that motherfucker has learned how to own his shit and how to apologize and how to mean
Mm,
it and how to show it. And even to where the victim, like where like women that he's treated poorly have come back and said, I respect him now. We're good. And it's
mm,
like,
that's great.
oh, it's
Yeah.
like he has learned. But the thing with him is he started talking about the hero's journey and how much he's inspired by Joseph Campbell. He calls it a thing called, he's adapted it for storytelling for TV called the story circle. He divides it up into 4 parts. It's when a character is in a world that they're used to, they need something, so they leave the unknown
Mm,
and they start to adapt to this world where they can finally get what they want. They become masters of it. They get what they want, but at a price, which is usually comedic. And then they're able to go back to the rest of the world, to their community, and share what they had. So
mm,
each one of the characters, 7 characters in each episode, has these in the episodes or even throughout arcs. And that got me to start reading books. There was a book that I read when I was still a Christian by a Methodist or by a Presbyterian called Word Pictures. And in it, it talked about the hero's journey, but talked about how um, all of the other stories are just shadows of the gospel, of how the gospel is the ultimate one, and any other storytelling was just the like general grace, was the general like grace of God that he gave out to humanity. So everything's pointing back to Jesus. But then I started hearing about Gilgamesh that
mm,
predated, and I'm like,
yes.
shadows aren't before, they're after. Huh. Like when we're
Mm,
talking about time. And then when I started deconstructing, I started to get more of the hero's journey, and then was able to look at things more objectively in a progressive, like secular idea, because human secular, like ethical societies and what we call secular humanism now is an
mhm,
offshoot of Judaism. It is Judaism who's like, so no, let's branch away from these texts and let's provide what we've been doing inside of this community as a liberal community, but do it for everyone. And so, like, that grew my appreciation for Judaism too, that was able to do that. And now, how do I treat Judaism and Christianity as equality? How do I treat me, all of it? And the only way to do it was for us to talk about what we've actually experienced,
mm,
representation, not advertising for this other quiet deity. And I also kept on running into like apologetics with fundamentalism, and even in, because progressive Christianity is a form of apologetics. It is
okay.
apologetics that uses cultural things as their proof. So instead of
Mm,
them going to like to the Bible and saying, well, the Bible says this, this, and this, they'll say things like, oh, well, it was written by, it was to be metaphor. But then it can never
mm,
show what was actually ever really was there. So it
mm.
becomes a basket to put things into, not a real explanation.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay.
but the point that I started to realize was, in order for us to like actually be equals into a global society, is to do the same thing that public school had to do, and that is to make it a secular education where it's
Mm,
not. And how do we do that? If we talk about what we've all experienced, what we have proof of, what we can observe and see, none of it is going to be supernatural. So what if there's natural explanations of why people, because like a lot of apologetics will be like, oh, well, could this many people be wrong for this many years? Well, yes, because you're saying that about other cultures too, right?
Mm.
You know what I mean? And so having that, like, treating each other the way that we want to be treated in a very dynamic way, empathetically and with information, um, it just kind of allows us all to just be the same and
Mm.
equals. Real equality with real diversity. Not saying everybody needs to give up their culture and their cultural stories, etc. Keep them. But if we all have a vocalized understanding of, hey, these stories that talk about the supernatural thing, it isn't about my culture being better than yours or more real or valid than yours. This is just how we did our storytelling. So don't take this part literal. If everybody came with their stories that are important to their cultures with that sort of disclaimer of what they're willing to share, can you imagine the riches
Mm.
and the lessons that all of us could share? Because that's what the hero's
Yeah.
journey is about. You're part of a community. You leave that community, go on your individual quest to figure out who you are and what's important to you. And then what do? You come back with that and you share it with others, but you come back a changed person. And then
Mm.
you're able to say, with sharing that experience produces wisdom in other people, and they can learn from what they've heard. So, like, my podcast and all of that has been about, let me listen to what people have brought back from their journeys, and what can we, as a deconstruction, however you define it, world that's coming out of Christianity, what can we learn from that? Not appropriate, but what can we learn and give credit to back to their experiences?
You know, and that's so powerful, because I think one of the things that frustrates me is seeing Christians or other religious people kind of have this attitude that there has to be like an objective beyond the human experience to dictate certain things like morality and ethics and relationships and, you know, community and structure and all of that, when there's very plausible explanations for how humans interact with each other that doesn't need to posit this like transcendent supernatural being or experience that hasn't even been proven to exist. I think that's one of the frustrations that I have. I think when I was going through my own deconstruction was that there were so many like progressive Christians who were just like really pressuring me to like hold on to these stories and hold on to this community and hold on to this and hold on to that. You can have your brain and you can have your intellect, but you can't get rid of these things because these things are still like so vital for you. And I'm just like, but why are you making me keep something that doesn't even resonate with me anymore? Like, if you want me to keep my intellect and you want me to grow in my beliefs and in my values and in my morals and how I interact with people, if it doesn't serve me, why do you want me to hold on to it? And that's what I'm seeing
It
so
serves them.
much. Oh, okay. There you go. You just hit the nail on the
That's
head
what it
right there.
comes down
It
to.
serves them. Go
Because it
ahead.
serves
Yeah.
them.
Okay.
That's been my experience. I mean, I committed myself to ministry when I was 14. That was my only goal. But the difference between me and them was my deconstruction. I wasn't allowing for. I wasn't in the ministry at that very point. I was like working at a church plant, you know, so it wasn't like that was my career. And there's a quote that says, it's very difficult for a man to be honest about what he makes his living on. And that stuck with me. And I started to experience that a lot in progressive Christian circles. There's still an element of advertisement in what they do. Even when I'm bumping up against queer clergy, there's a gay pastor, Brandon, I'll call him, Robertson. He's pretty like well known in the thing. I try to interact with him and ask questions. And here's what it comes down to: is he went through conversion therapy and he got out. Matthew Vines, same, but his family was there for him, etc. My thing was, I'm like, God, answer. I've done 28 years of holding my sexuality, saved myself from marriage. I've done every single thing that you wanted me to do.
Yep.
Now you fucking show up if this is a relationship, if this is a two-side, because I've gone through Bible college, I've committed this, I've kept, And it's not that I'm doing these things to prove myself, but I've learned through my divorce, my ex-wife has grown. I love her. I'm not speaking bad about her. And through my family, my abusive mom, my abusive dad, and my abusive brother, that there's expectations into a relationship that's two-sided. And if it's just one person doing all of the work and getting gaslighted, then that's fucking bullshit. So whenever I would like question, okay, well, why did I, if oh, I just misunderstood God. God's actually really cool with gay people and has been the whole time. He just never got around to telling us weirdos who were repressing ourselves. She never thought to like circle back to us and stop our convictions or to like communicate. No, if you make God answer for like his actions, you realize that there's nothing for him to answer for. And so I wasn't going to continue advertising God as the answer to my problems because he didn't do any shit. I did everything. And it wasn't that I did it to get anything back, but if it's a relationship, answer my prayers because you said you would. Show up because you said you would. And it was like, you're a deadbeat partner. Let me divorce you now. And that's kind of what it was, is there was just nothing to answer for. But the thing with like, if you compare my experience with Brandon, gay pastor Brandon, the only difference is he was able to have a career. God didn't show up for him in any other way that he didn't show up for me. It was just, he learned how to internalize, pivot it. And now it's coming out with a lot of progressive clergy that I'm interacting with on TikTok and other places, even like the good, quote unquote, good ones that are even claiming to be queer as themselves. Their behavior is showing they don't give a fuck about ex-Christians who are gay or conversion therapy survivors who left the faith. They have been blocking them, quietening them, telling them that their trauma is less than, trying to call them out as fake allies to the queer community, saying that they're if they criticize the Bible, then they are attacking the entire queer community. All just is like extremely problematic shit, where I realized holy shit, you all haven't cared about queer people because they're people. You've cared about queer people because it helps allow Christianity to survive in a new environment. And that environment is one where queer people are accepted.
You're exploiting them for your purposes, is what I'm hearing. They're exploiting them for their purposes to continue on to this movement that's been continuing to give them power and influence and prestige and all of those things, because it is costly whenever you're really trying to genuinely follow that path, and you're willing to divest from anything that's harmful for something better. But if you're going to remain in a system that can inherently be harmful because it has harmful beliefs attached to it, yet you're trying to manipulate it to where it's like it sounds like it's like a cognitive dissonance thing. It's like they're cognitively dissident, or they're just trying to like over rationalize or over like justify their beliefs by coming up with all these different interpretations and these mental gymnastics to keep a system that's serving them, but it's not really serving the people that they are claiming to be in service of and to help and to mentor.
This is what I think happens. I think I'm going to break everybody down into two binary groups. Of course, nothing's binary. We all understand it. But there's those who their priority is narratives and then people. And then there's those who are people and then narratives. I see myself as a people, then narratives. I think secular humanism does that inherently. But I think what happens when you're brought up in a narratives people environment, aka Christianity, if you're brought up in that, those who are wired to care about people before narratives want to find a way to change it. And if they don't, and then if they go to seminary, or if they become clergy, or they're even being taught by like a progressive like university, etc., to get a degree, because those places are inherently narrative based, I think that the people who are empathetic feel like they're finally at a thing that is humans first, but it's not, because it's inherently built on that narrative. So that's where like you start to see like Satanism doing great things with the same metaphors as progressive Christianity, but in all these different and then it's like, well, how do you reconcile all of this? And to me, in my experience, my 8 years of deconstructing or whatever has been, because you have to listen to people first, then the narratives. And then the tricky thing is whenever progressive Christians try to shove the people back into the narratives. Oh, no, Jesus was pro-gay this whole time. He may have once healed a guy's boyfriend, and that means that he was cool with the whole queer community, and you're an idiot if you don't see it, right, guys? Yeah, all my progressive clergy friends said that you look like an idiot.
Man.
And that's what's become the norm. And because people are deconstructing, they're coming out of fundamentalism, we didn't have the tools to see things for our own yet, because we never had that opportunity to learn.
I think that's kind of why I went through that like slow, gradual process of deconstruction of like independent fundamentalism to conservative evangelicalism to like kind of like moderatism, mainline moderatism to progressive Christianity, because I didn't have any of those tools that you were saying. And so it was like, as I was kind of like deconstructing, once I started gaining more of those tools, I was like, well, I don't need any of this stuff. This stuff doesn't make any sense. And so drop it, right?
What tools? Tell me what tools.
So I would say just like critical thinking, logic, rational, like using rational brain, scientific, like using the scientific method, like philosophy, study a ton of philosophy, which is kind of like a logic and all that's a subset of philosophy.
Who owns all these tools, Ryan?
Well, humans do. Humans develop them.
They all are inherent to the human process.
Yeah.
And that is what we were strategically kept from. And that's the difference. When you talk about progressive Christianity, they still have to wedge in, yeah, but Jesus is the... Fuck that. When you just get down to what is inherently ours as humans, our birthright, as fucking aware beings, that is what got us out. And that's what gives us the awareness, is just having the permission to be back to our own, like Jamie Lee Finch communication, back to our own intuition, back to our own bodies, to be back home in ourselves. That's the answer. That's where the tools live. We are our own tool sheds.
Why do people still hold on to religion then? Why is religion still such a pervasive force in society? Because I've talked to a lot of other atheists on Twitter and other places, and there seems to be these huge debates and contentions. And if you about, oh, you know, if religion's such a farce, it would have died off like hundreds of years ago, if not thousands of years ago. Why is it still around? Is like, and that seems to be the hardest question for atheists to answer. What's your perspective on that?
The only answer, it comes down to one word: conflation. Everything that they are associating as good and as redeemable to those narratives is a conditioned belief or a conditioned experience. If you strip Christianity from its conditioned feelings, the social pressure, the fear of hell, the fear of disobedience, or you don't want to call it hell, the fear of separation, or whatever progressive Christians want to call it. If you take out all of the fear, all the manipulation, all the ways that the American Republicans have been trying to manipulate Americans, we've seen, and the Democrats, fuck them, that we've seen right before our eyes. If we take the same strategies, we strip it all you get is you get a story that doesn't really fit the experience. You get a story about a God who answers all of your prayers and does all the miracles and you know, is there for you, but that's not really what happens. So like that's the thing, is the conflation. We've been conditioned our entire life to see it as an all or nothing package, a prepackaged experience. If anything good happens in our life, we gave credit to God. If anything bad happened, we did it to ourselves. It was an entire process. It wasn't just a belief, it was a belief system. That means like those coin banks, you put coins in and automatically separates
Oh,
it.
right.
The system did that for our each one of our experiences, but at the bottom is always sorted in a way for us to give credit, not blame, credit only to the system and blame only to us and to other humans. And non-believers, they only sinned because they were influenced. It all happened, and it was so pervasive that it touched how we process information. It didn't just give us information, it taught us how to process all information in a way where it will always be innocent, we will always be guilty, it will always be credible, it will always be trustworthy and everything, because it taught me about love. So of course that's the source of love for everybody, because it's ignorant and unwilling to look at other cultures and how well other cultures have understood the same values and the same concepts as them, but with completely different narratives that don't need to get credit back to theirs. Whenever we can just say everybody gets the credit and the blame for their own narratives, okay, well, now let's take a breath and figure out a better way for us to teach this without needing to blame each other. And the only answer to that, in my experience so far, has been something that looks a hell of a lot like secular humanism.
And I think one thing that you've mentioned a lot, which I totally agree with, is how progressive Christianity is just becoming, it's just basically taking like a secular humanist, taking all the work that secular humanists have done.
Yes.
They're taking all the work, all the effort to construct this really solid, logical foundation for people to live by. And then they're just inserting, it's like they're trying to like blend in the Bible with secular. Yeah, there you go. There you go.
They take the credit away from trans women of color, daywalking drag queens, women, self-proclaimed butch lesbians who threw bricks at cops. They took like the queer revolution that people of color and mostly women fought, and then they said, well, Jesus 2,000 years ago healed somebody. That's Stonewall, right? And I've even heard like sermons of like queer pastor or gay pastor Brandon where he talked about Stonewall and even gave credit to Marsha and other women who fought for queer rights, and just used it as an introduction to talk about how God fights for our rights and Jesus. And it's like, no, you motherfucker. Right. They did not do shit for your Jesus. They did shit for my community, for themselves and for me and people who are fucking people, not for your goddamn narrative. And if you want to turn that into a commercial and advertise then for your messaging, then fuck you, because that's appropriation, which you say is so wrong for everybody else to do. They fight for every other culture except for fundamentalists, because they attack it because it looks bad, makes them look bad. Right. But then they have this lip service of we're here for all other cultures, we're friends with Judaism now. We're all here for all the other spirituals. But no, their allyship ends the moment that they can stop using those people as a shield of criticism. A big thing right now, TikTok, is somebody has an ex-Christian criticize this documentary that's coming out that's supposed to like get the Bible off the hook for all of its homophobia because a word was added in 1946.
I heard about that. I heard about that. Yeah.
This ex-pastor said, no, the Bible is homophobic. And they said, how dare you attack the queer community? How dare you attack the entire... And it's like, motherfuckers, no, he didn't.
As if the entire queer community is Christian. That's just like an asinine argument in the first place.
Everybody who pointed this out to these, even one of them is bisexual, one of them is a lesbian, one of them is a gay man. So we can't criticize those progressive clergy. They're the good ones. No, they've shown themselves not to give a fuck about ex-Christians or conversion therapy survivors who left the faith. It is about the narrative inherently for their jobs but they've learned how to camouflage. Like I talked about biology. I'm sorry I'm going on a rant. I promise I'm finishing up.
No, this is good. Go ahead.
Talking about biology and talking about looking more objective of how these stories work and how they've evolved. They're going to evolve to their environment. When the environment is anti-gay, then they're going to be able to bring out their anti-gay aspects. When the environment is pro-gay, they're going to try to bring out their pro-gay aspects. It has nothing to do with the fucking queer people.
That's right.
It has everything to do with the camouflage that they're taking upon themselves to fit into an environment. We look through evolution. There are mimickers, like butterflies. Let me specifically. Butterflies that when they're poisonous, they started to look a certain way. Then there were mimickers that evolved to look like the poisonous ones, even though they weren't poisonous, because then they wouldn't get eaten. Yeah, that's what progressive Christianity is. It is a species of toxic beliefs that have learned to camouflage themselves into a progressive environment so that they will be able to survive. Whenever people start to criticize Christianity, fundamentalism is an umbrella for them, and they live under that umbrella to where they don't get the criticism until people like me who like start deconstructing, and others like you. And I know that some people on TikTok that are becoming more critical of it now, who are able to like come out and say, hey, this doesn't add up. And people like us who have like seen how they have approached us as deconstructioners, and how they are using the same tactics that our fundamentalist pastors did, but just tweaking them in a little different way. That's why I said it was like an apologetics. That is a red flag to me, and tells me that no, we don't need to tell people how to deconstruct. We don't need to tell people to deconstruct and how to guide them. We need to give them the tools so they can deconstruct on their own. And if they can come up with some reason that progressive Christianity fits all these other tests that other religions can't, or that fundamentalism can't, or that somehow makes the Bible totally not believable, but also completely believable. If you can find a way to make that reconcile, I would love to see it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, it's about helping people along the journey, not leading them to a destination. And as long as religion continues to dictate what the destination is, then you can never really genuinely help people along their journey in a way that's beneficial to them. Because like you said, it's always going to be self-serving to the people in power, which are, the people that are in churches, pastors and other clergy, and people that have to continue to spread this message that has toxic underpinnings to it, no matter how much you try to dress it up as enlightened or cultured, no matter how much, like you said, you try to appropriate it from secular humanism to make it more palatable. In the end, you're just like, fucking up humanism, and then you're just making your beliefs a disaster. So you're ruining both. It's like, just let it lie. And that's why I kind of went toward secular humanism, because I was realizing, like we said earlier, secular humanism and humanists have been doing all this work to try to make this world a better place, and to stand for equality and diversity and inclusion, and for justice, and for all these things. And then like religious people came along and were like, oh, look at what these people are doing. That's so wonderful, but they're godless, and so they're horrible. And so we need to do that, so that way we can continue to have this moral superiority and continue to lord it over godless people, people that are considered, atheist or in that community. And I'm getting tired of it, frankly. And you've been very vocal, and I've been very vocal about how that's just bullshit. Like, that you need to like disarm your moral superiority, because you're using it as a weapon to hurt people. And specifically people in the queer community, which you're a part of, which I think is absolutely abhorrent.
And even those who have probably are motivated by people that want to take care of people, because their approach is inherently narrative based. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That gets mixed up too, because then there are people, well, no, I know this person and they're really good. They're really there for me. My experience with this is great. I don't understand. But it's like, no, that's not the point though. They were able to be there for you because you were within their belief system. And if they were unwilling to even change a little bit for a secular person or an ex-Christian or somebody who might be legitimately triggered by God narratives, if they were unwilling to budge for that, they're showing themselves not to really be there for what they say that they're there for. And their inherent biases is what's keeping them from seeing that. And that's a hard part about progressive Christianity, is now that we're seeing these like inherent biases, like, hey, you all are probably good people and you're probably here because you really want to be, but the way your approach is working isn't doing that. And then what I've experienced is not a single fucking one. No matter how I approach them, I don't care how damn polite I am. I don't know, care how like abrupt I am. They will not give a fuck or answer me, and will do nothing but, if it's a public thing, they'll try to make me look dumb, and then I'll show that I know what I'm talking about, or they'll just fucking block me. And that's where it comes through of like, if you're not willing to hear the criticism that you're giving to fundamentalism, fuck you, because you're not treating others the way that you want to be treated.
That's good.
And if you're not, and if you want them to like respond to it in a way that gives glory to your God, but you're not willing to listen to somebody because they have a different belief system, then also fuck you, because you're not you're not treating others the way you would be treated. It has to be your empathy and your information. I can't just say, well, I need to be believed by faith, but don't believe those other people. That's not treating others the way you would be treated. It has to be what's objective, what we all can see, information, and how we treat one another, not making special rules for ourselves or for our partners, or for like fundamentalism or Judaism because we have enough in common with them. No. Treat others the way you would be treated, with your empathy and with your information.
Yeah, and I mean, if we want to talk about what's it called, appropriation, Christianity is the ultimate appropriator from Judaism. Look, you know what? I don't want.
Their God is God.
I don't want to get
God, and they call their book.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like,
yeah, come on, guys. Yeah,
I mean, I'll get roasted for that, but that's just how I feel. So to wrap up, what do you think atheism and humanism can do more to make more of an impact in society? Because we're seeing a growing number of people. Statistically, it's very obvious that about a fifth of Americans are nuns, right? They're either classified as atheist or agnostic or humanist, or just some form of non-religious, or maybe even spiritual but non-religious. So we're seeing a huge trend of people leaving religion, and we're seeing more and more people come into secular humanist or atheist spaces. But we're still seeing, especially in American context, because that's where we live, we're still seeing this complete silencing of non-religious, specifically non-Christian voices. What can we do more to make ourselves known and to make ourselves seen in our communities? What do you think? What do you think we should do?
My answer is biased, and it's more of like what I feel like my calling is, and that is just to educate people on the power of storytelling objectively. And then I think it allowed, from my experience at least, so much came natural from that. But that's such like a very abstract, like big idea thing. So I would say like it comes to education of letting people know why their texts are not important, or like not credible enough for you to center your entire life on. And then to like, so I think that might be the biggest thing. And it's really, we have to find creative, and this is what my podcast is. There's like a book that I'm wanting to write, and I just don't know how to do it yet. But I want to find ways to teach people how to center values, not narratives. If we centered values, then we can collaborate and have curiosity of each other's cultures. But as long as we keep centering narratives, even unconsciously through our biases, that I think progressive Christianity is guilty of. It has to be about values, or else we can't grow as a species, especially in this global world, with the world becoming so much smaller as it is through the internet, through this, video calls, and we have to learn to center values, and that's the only way our species can provide. We have to change what we call we. Our we used to be tribalism, but our we has to become humanity. Our we has to become all of us, and by we I also mean other life on Earth. Our we has to become bigger. It can't just have borders with narratives.
Wow. That's great. And also, I would say community. We have to learn how to form communities because I feel like the aspect of community is still so vital. People need to be seen by other people and interact with other people. But I think that humanists and atheists can build better communities than religious places can, but we're still in such infancy on that. But I think that's the work as well. Education, advocacy, forming community, and just continuing to make our voices known. And like you said, as the world gets smaller, we are making our voices known. So people are finally having to wrestle with the growing population of whatever you want to call them, atheist, unbelievers, godless, whatever. You have to contend with us, and you need to contend with our ideas, and we need to but like you said, we need to learn also how to have a multicultural globalist perspective of how do we live amongst each other, because in the end, no matter what your beliefs are or what my beliefs are, we're all human. So like you said, values, let's focus on values, be value centered, not narrative centered, because in the end, our values were a lot more alike than we think if we would just strip out all the toxic narrative BS and get down to the brass tacks of like what really makes us human. And that's partly the work that me and my wife have had to do, because my wife is still a Christian and I'm an atheist. And for our marriage to survive and to grow, which I felt like we've actually grown this more in this past year and a half since I came out than we had before. Yeah. And it's because we had to make the conscious decision that our values are more important than our narratives, and that we might not agree on anything, but we need to be curious. We need to collaborate. We need to communicate. We need to talk these things through and grow. And that's how. So I think me and my wife, you know, and millions of others probably in our situation, let's be the models for how we do that in societies. But
because if your marriage was built on narratives, it would be over.
That's what I was afraid of. That's what I truly was afraid of. I had struggled for so long to even come out to my wife. I was scared to death because I truly, with all my heart, love my wife. I love our children. But to lose all of that would have been just incredibly painful. And I was so scared, but I'm like, I cannot no longer fake it. I cannot be this Christian that I don't even resonate with anymore. Right. And so I just had to take that bold chance and that bold leap and just tell her, look, I don't believe any of this anymore. If this means we have to get divorced, we'll navigate that. If this means we can stay together, but I'm telling you, I'm in it because I love you. I never married you because of our narrative. I never married you because of our faith. I married you because of you. And then my wife said the same thing. And man, we cried, we laughed, we hugged, and now we're just moving forward in our marriage and realizing that values are important. So Brady, the amount of wisdom you shared today on this podcast is amazing. I think that story circle thing you talked about by Dan Harmon and the hero's journey, what a great tool that deconstruction, people going through deconstruction can use. Just like going through that and studying that and seeing where it leads for you, because we're all going to come out in a slightly different destination, but the journey is really where all the learning and the growth takes place. But you've shared so much today, Brady. I just really appreciate you. I could have you on for hours. I'll have to get you back on podcast to talk more, because I know there's so much more we could have talked about. But thank you for all the work you do. I'm so happy to be here. Yeah, thank you. Go ahead and plug all your work real quick before we end.
Yeah, so
your podcast and everything.
The Life After podcast. It's like a blue background and I'm orange on it. And then there is, I'm on TikTok and everything. I've got a weird name, Brady, just like the Brady Bunch, and then Hardin, which is like hard on, but IN at the end instead. And you'll be able to find me on anything. So.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much. And we're going to have all that in the description and all that. So you guys, please go check out Brady's work. He's doing amazing things. Such an amazing person. I am so grateful to have you here. Thank you so much for your time and for everything that you shared. And we will talk soon.
Beautiful. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Some Random Thoughts. You can find the podcast in audio form wherever you get your podcast, and at anchor.fm/somerandomthoughts. You can find the podcast in video form on my YouTube at youtube.com/Ryan Mulkowsky. Connect with me on Twitter and Instagram at Ryan Mulkowsky, and on my website at www.ryanmulkowsky.com. That's RYANMulkowsky.com.
Programming note. This is a completely self-produced project, and the guests on this program have volunteered their time. So until next time, you have one life. Make the most of it.